Between 2005 and 2020, Robbie Lawlor was suspected in at least 10 murders, arson attacks, and dismembered bodies scattered across Dublin. But he was convicted of none. The justice system couldn't stop him. Witnesses recanted and evidence disappeared, until April 4th, 2020, when Lawlor walked into a Belfast trap. 4 shots ended what the courts couldn't. This is the story of a killer who operated in plain sight, the system that failed to contain him, until the only rung left was the one that dropped him straight into the grave, and the families left to bury the pieces. Welcome to Crime Pulse. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join our community, exploring Ireland's most dangerous criminal underworlds. Like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into the feuds, figures, and cases that shape the streets. Long before his name became shorthand for fear, Robbie Lawlor was just another kid growing up in the hard edges of Dublin's north side, estates where loyalty was currency and violence was a language. Born in 1985, Lawlor was from Foxhill in Coolock, though he later lived in County Meath. He was a father of 3 children and, in later years, described himself as an unemployed fitness trainer. By his late teens, Lawlor had already built a reputation that set him apart. He wasn't just another street-level thug. He was calculating, detached, and willing to go further than men 10 years older than him. In his later life, he struggled with cocaine and steroid addiction, habits that would increasingly influence his behavior. Robbie Lawlor's criminal activity began at age 18. His earliest offenses were primarily related to joyriding and dangerous driving in Dublin's north side, including areas like Drogheda and Coolock. He frequently drove without a license or L plates and was involved in speeding and other traffic violations. These offences, while relatively minor, repeatedly brought him to the attention of the Garda and established a pattern of persistent offending. Alongside traffic-related crimes, Lawlor committed other low-level offences, including public order incidents, minor assaults, and petty theft. Most of these offences resulted in fines, short custodial sentences, or suspended sentences. By 2003 to 2004, Lawlor's activity began to show signs of escalation. He moved from small-scale public disturbances and joyriding to involvement with low-level drug possession and handling stolen property. In 2005, Lawlor was arrested in Dublin for possession of cocaine and a stolen vehicle. This arrest led to his first major custodial sentence, 7 years in prison, of which he served approximately 4 to 5 years with remission. This period marked a turning point. While incarcerated, Lawlor became more closely associated with other criminals and began building contacts that would later play a role in gang feuds and organized criminal activity. During these early years, Lawlor avoided long sentences for most offenses due to plea deals, evidential difficulties, or acquittals. Nevertheless, the pattern of repeated offending, combined with a growing familiarity with the Garda and the criminal justice system, laid the groundwork for his later involvement in violent crimes and high-level gang activity. These years established both his methods and his reputation as someone who would consistently re-offend, showing early signs of the persistence risk-taking that would define his later career. Following his release from prison, Robbie Lawlor didn't waste any time. He shifted straight from minor offences to serious violent crime, embedding himself deeper into Dublin's criminal underworld. By this stage, he was no longer just a repeat offender. He became a sought-after freelance gunman for the North Dublin factions, the go-to man when it came to sorting out disputes over drugs, debts, and patches of territory. Lawlor's first suspected involvement in a murder came in 2005, the killing of Byrne, a low-level offender who was on day release from Mountjoy. Garda believed the hit was over a gang debt, a sign that, even at 20 or so, Lawlor was already being trusted with the dirtiest jobs, showing ambition and a cold kind of ruthlessness. In 2008, he was suspected of shooting Anthony Ayodeji in Darndale during a gang dispute. Ayodeji lived, but the Garda had Lawlor as the prime suspect, another marker that he was now the detached, efficient enforcer people rang when they wanted someone put in their place. By 2009, his name was all over the most serious stuff. David Fred Lynch, once an associate, gunned down in Belcamp over what looked like a drug deal double-cross. Lawlor was the chief suspect, and Noel Deans, the accomplice on that job, couldn't keep his mouth shut. Started boasting about it, right up until he turned up dead himself. 2010, Lawlor was suspected of killing Deans, the very same guy who'd helped him with Lynch. Garda believed Lawlor lured him to an alley in Priorswood and finished it. Loose ends, you see. That was Lawlor learning fast how to manage risk in a world where nobody stays quiet forever. During these years, his profile changed completely. No more petty stuff, no more joyriding, just targeted, organized violence. Cold, clean, and always one step ahead. It was the making of him, the foundation for what would later turn Robbie Lawlor into one of Dublin's most feared enforcers. Between 2010 and 2018, Robbie Lawlor's criminal activity expanded into a combination of organised enforcement work and mid-level offences across Dublin's north side and surrounding areas, operating across estates including Coolock, Darndale, Belcamp, and later Drogheda. He was involved in acts of intimidation, debt collection, and retaliation for multiple factions. During these years, Lawlor continued to assert his dominance in street-level disputes, often clashing with rival gangs or individuals threatening his associates. Garda records document repeated involvement in bar fights, street confrontations, and conflicts linked to drug disputes and territorial disagreements. These incidents, while minor on their own, reflected his broader reputation as a man relied upon to resolve conflicts with decisive force. In 2013, Lawlor carried out a high-profile robbery at the McDonald's in Donamed, putting a gun to a security guard's head and stealing the cash box. Garda later spotted him attempting to conceal marked stolen money. Arrested and charged with robbery, he eventually pleaded guilty to the lesser offence of possession of stolen cash and was sentenced to 32 months in prison. Lawlor's disregard for boundaries was further demonstrated in 2015, when Garda observed him driving a stolen car despite being disqualified. He received a 16-month prison sentence, during which he attempted an escape in 2016 while on a hospital visit to the Martyr Hospital. Reports indicate he tried to attack security guards during the attempt, though it was unsuccessful. These episodes highlighted both his willingness to take extreme risks and his persistent defiance of authority. By the mid-2000s, Lawlor had established a pattern of combining mid-level offences with calculated acts of violence. Intelligence shows he was frequently employed by gang members as a reliable executor of threats, capable of carrying out attacks with precision and focus. His actions during this period not only reinforced his fearsome reputation, but also provided him with the contacts and operational experience that would later underpin involvement in larger, high-profile feuds across Dublin and Drogheda. By early 2018, tensions in Coolock, Dublin were escalating, and one of the key events was the murder of Kenneth Finn in February. He was the right-hand man to a prominent Northside crime figure known locally as Mr. Big. In Dublin's gang landscape, Finn's position was significant. He oversaw operations, enforced discipline, and acted as a mediator and enforcer within the Coolock network. Targeting him was not merely an attack on an individual. It represented a direct challenge to the authority and structure of one of the area's most established criminal factions. Robbie Lawlor was suspected of carrying out the killing. On a February afternoon, Finn was shot dead in the parking lot of a Dublin pub. Witnesses observed the figure exit a vehicle, open fire at close range, and leave swiftly, suggesting careful planning and an intent to minimize exposure. Multiple shots struck Finn, leaving him dead at the scene. Law enforcement later linked the attack to Lawlor through a combination of CCTV footage, tips from local informants, and intercepted communications via EncroChat, the encrypted messaging service later accessed by authorities. The killing was motivated by ongoing tensions between Finn's faction and rival groups in Coolock. Disputes over drug debts, territorial control, and personal grievances had been simmering for months. Lawlor's suspected involvement, acting on behalf of a rival faction, was part of a broader strategy to destabilize Mr. Big's control over the area. The murder of Finn immediately intensified hostilities. Associates of Finn sought retaliation, and within days, authorities observed a surge in violent incidents, including assaults, shootings, and threats across the north side. The event marked the transition from individual disputes to a full-scale feud, affecting multiple estates in Coolock and signaling the start of a new, more dangerous chapter in the area's criminal landscape. In 2018, Robbie Lawlor became actively involved in the Drogheda feud through his brother-in-law, Richie Carberry, who was married to Lawlor's sister Eileen. The feud pitted local factions against one another, including groups led by Cornelius Price and members of the Maguire family. Lawlor's involvement placed him at the center of a series of violent confrontations. In prison earlier that year, Lawlor was stabbed during an altercation. Prison officials suggested the attack had been ordered by Cornelius Price, highlighting the reach and premeditation of ongoing disputes even within correctional facilities. On 5th of July 2018, Owen Maguire, a leading figure in one of the factions and an associate of Cornelius Price, was shot 6 times at his home on Cement Road. Garda reports indicate that the attack left Maguire paralyzed. Lawlor fled the scene at high speed toward the northern border. Covered in petrol and stripped of most of his clothing, he was arrested but released due to insufficient direct evidence linking him to the shooting. In November 2022, court documents submitted by the Criminal Assets Bureau would later identify Lawlor as the gunman responsible for the attack. The feud escalated further on the 4th of November 2019, when Richie Carberry was shot dead at his home. Garda suspected a young associate of David Fred Lynch, the man Lawlor had murdered in 2009, may have carried out the killing. Lawlor reportedly suspected that Keane Mulready Woods, the 17-year-old son of Price Maguire gang member Barry Woods, was involved in Carberry's assassination, adding layers of tension to the feud. Shortly after being acquitted of attempted murder charges and released from custody, Lawlor was mugged by teenagers in December 2019 outside a gym. The assault was filmed by the attackers, who stole his gym bag and flip-flops, posting images online. Garda reports indicate that the attack included a young associate of David Fred Lynch and was suspected to involve Keane Mulready Woods. The incident was interpreted as a challenge and taunt within the ongoing feud. In February 2019, Lawlor's violence continued with the attempted murder of Brendan Maguire, Owen's brother. Garda detailed that the shooting occurred outside a gym, with multiple rounds striking Brendan in the upper body and arms. The attack caused near-fatal injuries and intensified hostilities between rival factions. In addition to these shootings, Lawlor carried out acts of arson as part of his role in enforcing debts and intimidation. In 2018, he petrol-bombed a young man's house in Drogheda over a drug-related debt. Garda records show the attack was calculated, intended to punish or intimidate, and resulted in a 4-month suspended sentence. Intelligence reports from Garda noted that these incidents were operational and targeted, with Lawlor serving as the executor of violence for multiple factions. His actions during this period made the Drogheda feud one of the most violent and high-profile episodes in Northeast Ireland, setting the stage for further escalation, including the murder of Keane Mulready Woods in January 2020. In 2019, Robbie Lawlor stood trial, accused of threatening to murder his ex-girlfriend, Rachel Kerwin, her partner Derek Mitchell, and Kerwin's mother, Fiona Mitchell. The charges also included an attempted murder of Fiona and the killing of the family pet dog. Garda reports indicate that shots had been fired at the Mitchell family home, striking the property and killing the dog. The incident was treated as a serious threat to life, prompting an immediate Garda investigation. Lawlor's alleged actions were reported to Garda by neighbors who observed suspicious activity outside the residence. Forensic teams examined the scene, recovering shell casings. Garda also documented damage to the property. Initially, Rachel Kerwin provided statements to Garda describing threats and the use of firearms aimed at the household. Based on these statements and other investigative material, charges were formally brought against Lawlor. During the trial, however, it emerged that Kerwin had made false statements implicating Lawlor. She recanted her testimony, and the court found there was insufficient evidence to sustain the charges. Without corroborating witnesses or definitive forensic evidence linking him directly to the attack, Lawlor was acquitted and released from custody. Despite the acquittal, Garda expressed concern over Lawlor's release. Investigators noted that the case occurred within the context of ongoing gang disputes, where firearms and intimidation were common tools. The nature of the attack, shots fired at a residential property, raised concerns for public safety, particularly given Lawlor's history of involvement in violent incidents. To mitigate the risk, Garda issued a national alert following his release, monitoring his movements and informing communities in North Dublin and surrounding areas. On the 12th of January 2020, 17-year-old Keane Mulready Woods from Drogheda went missing. The teenager, involved in low-level drug activity, was deliberately lured to a property in the town, later identified as a trap house connected to local gang networks. Authorities quickly determined that his disappearance was premeditated, part of a calculated move in the escalating Drogheda feud. In the hours following Mulready Woods' disappearance, human remains began to surface across Dublin. On 13th January, a sports bag containing human hands was discovered in Coolock. Soon after, a human head and additional hands were found beside a burning car in Drumcondra. DNA analysis confirmed that all recovered parts belonged to Mulready Woods, highlighting the brutal nature of the attack. Among the remains in Coolock, investigators discovered a pair of flip-flops. This detail was interpreted as a deliberate message. The flip-flops referenced an earlier incident in December 2019, when Mulready Woods and his associates had mugged Robbie Lawlor, stealing his gym bag and flip-flops. This symbolic gesture suggested a calculated layer of messaging behind the violence, intended to humiliate and warn. Lawlor also reportedly suspected Mulready Woods of involvement in the November 2019 assassination of his brother-in-law, Richie Carberry. This suspicion added a personal motive to the already strategic nature of the killing, tying it directly into the ongoing network of feuds and vendettas. Mulready Woods' torso was recovered 2 months later in an overgrown ravine area in Drogheda. Evidence suggested that Lawlor had initially planned to dispose of body parts at Cornelius Price's compound in Gormanston, but the plan was altered. The deliberate distribution of remains across multiple locations, combined with symbolic messaging, demonstrated a methodical strategy, both to conceal evidence and to send a warning to rival factions. Investigators were also able to track Lawlor's involvement through CCTV footage from his residence, which captured activity consistent with the handling and transportation of the body. The murder served multiple purposes: retribution, intimidation, and a statement in the wider ongoing conflict, linking back to previous incidents, including the Owen and Brendan Maguire shootings, Lawlor's prison stabbing, and the feud between the Price and Maguire factions. The murder of Keane Mulready Woods marked a chilling escalation in the Drogheda feud. It underscored Lawlor's calculated approach to violence, combining symbolic messaging, operational planning, and brutal execution, a deadly statement to both allies and rivals in Dublin and Drogheda's criminal underworld. Following the murder of Keane Mulready Woods in January 2020, Robbie Lawlor became a prime target. In a wave of retaliatory actions, multiple gangs across Dublin, Louth, and surrounding areas were actively hunting him, seeking revenge for both past killings and the recent escalation in Drogheda. Intelligence suggested that his movements became increasingly restricted, and he frequently relocated between safe houses in Dublin, County Meath, and Louth to avoid detection. During this period, Lawlor also travelled to Belfast, reportedly attempting to forge new alliances and rebuild influence through connections with criminal networks in Northern Ireland. Authorities monitored these movements and documented contacts with known figures, though no large-scale operations were successfully re-established before his death. Many of his former alliances began to collapse. Associates in Dublin and Drogheda distanced themselves from him, either out of fear of retaliation from rival gangs or as part of negotiations with law enforcement. Sources indicate that some of these fractures left Lawlor increasingly isolated, relying on a smaller inner circle for protection. Lawlor's past role as a gun for hire, carrying out targeted attacks for multiple factions, which had previously cemented his position in criminal networks, now contributed to his vulnerability. Individuals who once relied on his enforcement skills saw him as a liability, while enemies viewed him as the focal point for retaliation. Reports also noted several failed attempts on Lawlor's life in the months leading up to his death. Surveillance and witness accounts documented multiple near-miss attacks across Dublin and surrounding counties, though he avoided serious injury until the fatal incident. Despite these pressures, Lawlor appeared determined to maintain influence. Sources suggest he explored avenues to reassert control, particularly through his Belfast contacts, seeking to leverage cross-border connections to regain a foothold in organized crime. These efforts, however, were largely unsuccessful, as authorities and rival factions increased surveillance and coordinated actions to restrict his movements. On the 4th of April 2020, Robbie Lawlor traveled to Belfast under the pretense of meeting individuals regarding a debt collection, a story that was later determined by law enforcement to be a deliberate setup. Intelligence from both Garda and the Police Service of Northern Ireland indicates that Lawlor had been specifically lured, with the arrangement designed to place him in a controlled environment where he could be targeted. A three-man team had been monitoring him for days prior to the killing. Surveillance reports show that the team scouted the location in advance, noting Lawlor's habits, arrival times, and potential escape routes. The preparation was meticulous, with the shooters coordinating positions and timing to ensure maximum control. Around 11:50 a.m., Robbie Lawlor was shot 4 times, 3 to the head, 1 to the chest, at point-blank range. Following the shooting, law enforcement quickly responded. Within hours, 3 men suspected of involvement in the murder were arrested and questioned at Musgrave Police Station, with a 4th suspect apprehended the following day. Footage later emerged showing rival gang members celebrating Lawlor's death, dancing and cheering in the streets of Dublin and Belfast. His funeral was held in Dardistown Cemetery, where he was buried next to his brother-in-law, Richie Carberry. By December 2020, 2 men, one from Derry and one from Belfast, were formally charged with Lawlor's murder. They faced additional charges of possession of a 9mm pistol with intent to endanger life. Court records indicate that both men appeared via video link, speaking only to confirm that they understood the charges. They were remanded in custody, with subsequent court appearances scheduled to continue the legal process. The Belfast execution represented the culmination of Lawlor's violent and high-profile criminal career. The attack not only ended Lawlor's direct involvement in Dublin and Drogheda gang conflicts, but also served as a stark warning within the criminal underworld that no past service or reputation could prevent fatal retaliation. The death of Robbie Lawlor on the 4th of April 2020 marked a decisive turning point in the Drogheda and North Dublin criminal landscape. The command structure within the Drogheda feud collapsed. Key associates either went into hiding, realigned with rival factions, or were arrested, leaving a power vacuum that curtailed further immediate acts of revenge. Garda reports indicate that several planned retaliatory attacks were halted in the wake of his death, illustrating the influence he had exerted over ongoing violence. Even after his death, Lawlor's reputation continued to resonate across criminal networks. Accounts from law enforcement, journalists, and former associates indicate that his history of calculated violence and involvement in multiple high-profile disputes cemented his notoriety. Many of the suspected murders linked to him remain unsolved. Garda intelligence and court documents identified him as a prime suspect in several cases, but witness intimidation, evidential gaps, and his death prevented posthumous convictions. The impact of his actions, both immediate and long-term, continues to influence gang rivalries, law enforcement operations, and public perceptions of organized crime in Dublin and Drogheda. Lawlor's story remains a cautionary example of how ambition, violence, and reputation intersect in Ireland's criminal underworld. For more in-depth investigations, case breakdowns, and expert analyses of Ireland's criminal underworld, subscribe to Crime Pulse. Stay informed, stay aware, and join us as we dissect the world where law, loyalty, and violence collide.